The alarms were screaming before I even opened my eyes. Red light filled the cockpit, pulsing across cracked glass and torn wires. My fuel gauge sat on empty. My hull was breached in 2 places, and somewhere behind me, closing fast, 3 Skarn hunter ships were tracking the last heat signature of my dying engine. I am Viserys. I was born under a sky the color of rust and gold, on a world called Ashvane, home of the Obsidian Wing clan. That world does not exist anymore. Neither does my clan. Neither does almost anyone I ever loved. And in the next few minutes, if I did not find a way to disappear, neither would I. My ship groaned as another shot grazed the wing. I gripped the controls with hands that had claws instead of fingers, muscles built for flight, not for begging machines to keep working. The dashboard flashed one final warning. Engine failure in 60 seconds. I had nowhere left to run. My homeworld was gone. My people were gone. I had spent 6 months drifting from system to system, hiding, surviving on scraps, always one step ahead of the Skarn patrols that hunted down the last of my kind, simply because we still existed. And now, in this forgotten corner of space, it looked like the running was finally going to end. Then I saw it. A shape ahead, small and battered, tumbling lazily through a debris field like a piece of trash caught in a slow current. A salvage hauler. Old, rusted, patched together with mismatched plating. Not a warship, not even close. But it had one thing my ship did not have anymore. Working thrusters. I did not think. I aimed straight for it, screaming a warning over an open channel that I doubted anyone would even hear, let alone answer. Get out of my way or you're going to die with me. A voice crackled back almost immediately, calm in a way that made no sense given the chaos around us. Copy that, hang on. The hauler shifted, faster than a ship that size should have been able to move, and dropped directly into the debris field, weaving between broken satellite husks and drifting metal, like it had done this 100 times before. I followed, my own ship shuddering with every impact I barely avoided. Behind me, the Skarn ships hesitated at the edge of the field, unwilling to risk their hulls in that mess. That hesitation was the only mercy I got that day. The hauler's voice came back through the static. You've got maybe 30 seconds before your engine gives out completely. I'm opening my bay door. Get in or get gone, your call. I did not have a choice, and we both knew it. I aimed my dying ship straight into the open bay of a stranger's vessel, said a silent prayer to ancestors who could no longer hear me, and hoped it would not be the last thing I ever did. The landing was rough, sparks, screeching metal, my restraints cutting into my shoulders hard enough to bruise. And then, silence, except for the low hum of the hauler's engines and my own ragged breathing. I did not move for a long moment. I kept waiting for the trap to spring, for weapons to be pointed at me, for chains, for questions I would not want to answer. That is what happens to the last of a dying species. People find out what you are worth on the open market, and it is never good. Instead, I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. A human stepped into view outside my cracked cockpit glass, hands raised where I could see them, empty. Hey, he said, voice steady. You're safe now. Nobody's taking anything else from you today. I stared at him. He was not what I expected. No armor, no weapons drawn. Just a tired-looking man in a stained jacket with grease on his hands and an expression that held no fear at all, even though I was easily twice his size and covered in scales that could shred through most things smaller than a bulkhead. You don't know what I am, I said, my voice rough from disuse. I know you're hurt, he said simply. The rest I can learn. His name was Elias Marlowe, and that was the day everything I thought I knew about the universe started to come apart in ways I did not expect. He got me out of the wreckage of my ship without asking a single question about who was chasing me or why. He set my cracked horn with careful, steady hands, wrapping the fracture in some kind of medical mesh that hummed faintly against my skin. He gave me water, then food, then more water, watching me carefully the entire time, like he expected me to collapse. I very nearly did. It was only after I had eaten, after the immediate danger had passed, that the questions started. Not accusations, not demands, just quiet curiosity. So, Elias said, leaning against a crate in the cargo hold, where I sat wrapped in a blanket that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. "Those ships back there, friends of yours?" I let out a hollow sound that might have once been a laugh. "Skarn Collective. They've been hunting my kind for the better part of a year now." "Your kind?" "Dragonkin, Obsidian Wing Clan, from Ashvane." I said the name of my homeworld and felt the familiar ache settle into my chest, the one that never fully went away. Not that it matters anymore. There is no clan left to speak of. There is no Ashvane left to speak of. Elias went quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. Not pity, which I had grown to despise in the few encounters I'd had with other beings since the attack. Something closer to respect. "What happened?" he asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only a genuine desire to understand. So I told him. I told him about the day the Skarn fleet came through the Sindral Belt without warning, without a declaration, without any reason beyond deciding that my people's territory sat on resources they wanted, and my people themselves were an inconvenience to be erased. I told him about the mineral cliffs of Ashvane that turned the color of dried blood at sunset, long before any actual blood was spilled there. I told him about my mother, who used to sing the old flight songs while she worked, her voice carrying across the nesting grounds every morning without fail. I told him about my younger sister, who laughed louder than anyone I had ever known, who used to race me across the canyon winds, until we were both breathless and dizzy with joy. I told him I had been off-world when it happened, running courier routes for buyers who barely looked at me, delivering cargo nobody cared about, while my entire world burned. I told him about the automated distress beacon that reached me 3 systems away, looping the same 40 seconds of static and screaming over and over, and how I had flown back anyway, knowing there was nothing left to save, needing to see it be true before I could let myself believe it. I told him about the ash, about the poisoned sky, about drifting through the wreckage of my homeworld for hours, searching for anyone, anything, before finally accepting there was no one left. By the time I finished, my voice had cracked more than once, and Elias had not said a single word the entire time. He had just listened, all the way through, without interrupting, without flinching, without offering the hollow comfort so many others tried to give when faced with grief too large to hold. When I finally fell silent, he did not say he was sorry. He did not say things would get better. He simply said, "Thank you for telling me. That matters. You matter." Something in me broke open at those words, gently, like a dam, finally allowing water through, after holding back a flood for far too long. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. I am not your responsibility. I am not even your species." Elias considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. "Because somebody decided your people didn't matter enough to exist," he said finally. "And I don't agree with that. Not even a little bit. You're sitting right here in front of me, alive, and that's proof they were wrong." I did not know what to say to that. Nobody had spoken to me like that since the attack. Nobody had looked at me and seen anything beyond a curiosity, a commodity, or a threat. Over the following days, Elias never pushed me for more than I was ready to give. He let me sleep in the small crew quarters of his hauler, gave me the larger portions of food even though I insisted I did not need them, and slowly, without either of us really discussing it, I stopped thinking about where I would go next. The Skarn patrols were still out there. I knew that. I knew accepting Elias's help put him at risk, and I told him as much, more than once, urging him to drop me at the nearest station and continue on with his life, unburdened by whatever danger followed me. He refused, every single time. "If they come, he said, tightening a bolt on one of the hauler's ancient engine parts without even looking up. "I'm not in the business of handing people over to be erased. Never have been." It took weeks before I understood that he meant every word of it. The Skarn Collective did eventually catch up to us. It happened on the edge of a trading outpost called Halvith Station, a sprawling, chaotic hub of merchants and travelers, where Elias had gone to trade salvage parts for fuel and supplies. I stayed hidden in the cargo hold, as I always did in populated areas, wrapped in loose fabric that hid most of my scales, praying that no one would look too closely. Someone did. A bounty broker recognized the markings along my forearm, the ones that identified me as Obsidian Wing Clan, markings that had once been a source of pride and were now a death sentence. Word spread fast on a station like that. By the time Elias returned to the hauler with supplies in hand, 3 Skarn enforcers were already waiting near the docking bay, weapons visible, expressions cold. I heard the confrontation through the hull before I saw it. Elias's voice, steady despite the obvious threat in front of him. "This is my ship," he said. "You don't have clearance to search it." "We're not here for your ship," one of the enforcers replied, voice flat and mechanical through a translator unit. "We're here for the cargo you're hiding inside it. Hand her over, and you walk away from this. Refuse, and we take her anyway, along with whatever's left of you." I moved toward the cargo bay door, ready to surrender myself before Elias could be hurt because of me. I had already lost everyone I loved. I was not about to let one more life be destroyed for my sake. But Elias's voice stopped me cold. "She's not cargo," he said, and something in his tone had shifted, gone harder, sharper. "She's a person, and she's under my protection. So no, I'm not handing her over." "Then you're making a mistake." "Maybe," Elias said, "but it's mine to make." What followed was not a fight in the traditional sense. Elias was no soldier, and his ship was no warship. But Halveth Station had rules of its own, rules that even the Skarn Collective could not simply ignore in front of witnesses. Elias raised his voice loud enough for the surrounding merchants and dockworkers to hear, calling out the enforcers for attempting an unlawful seizure on neutral station ground, invoking trade compact laws I did not even know existed, laws designed to prevent exactly this kind of unregulated hunting within station boundaries. A crowd gathered. Station security, drawn by the noise and the growing tension, arrived within minutes, caught between 2 forces who were about to unleash chaos on their tightly controlled floating rock. The Skarn enforcers, unwilling to trigger a diplomatic incident that would draw far more attention than they wanted, eventually withdrew, though not without a final warning. "This isn't over," the lead enforcer said, staring at the cargo bay door behind which I hid, listening to every word. "We know where to find her now." They left. Elias returned to the hauler minutes later, hands shaking slightly, with the aftermath of adrenaline, but his expression steady, almost calm. "We need to move," he said simply. "Now." We left Halveth Station within the hour, engines pushed harder than they had any right to be pushed, putting as much distance as possible between us and the enforcers, who now knew my location. I sat in the cockpit beside Elias for the first time since he had found me, watching the stars blur past the viewport, my mind racing. "You should not have done that," I finally said. "You put yourself at risk. For me. For someone you barely know." Elias glanced at me, something unreadable in his expression. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to change my mind." "It should. It doesn't." He returned his attention to the controls, adjusting our course with practiced ease. "I told you already. I don't hand people over. That's not who I am." "They will come again," I said quietly. "The Skarn do not give up easily. They have hunted my kind across a dozen systems already. They will not stop simply because one salvage pilot stood in their way once." "Then I guess we'll deal with it when it happens," Elias said, and there was no fear in his voice, only a strange, quiet determination that I could not quite understand. Over the following months, that pattern repeated itself more than once. The Skarn Collective did not give up, exactly as I predicted. They tracked us across 3 different systems, forcing Elias to abandon trade routes he had relied on for years, forcing him to take on riskier salvage jobs in more dangerous, less monitored regions of space, just to stay ahead of the bounty that now followed me wherever we went. I offered to leave more times than I could count. Each time he refused, not with grand speeches or dramatic declarations, but with the same quiet stubbornness that seemed to define everything about him. Slowly, without either of us really acknowledging it out loud, something shifted between us. I learned the rhythms of his ship, the particular hum of the engine when it needed maintenance, the way he hummed off-key while working on repairs, completely unaware of how badly he butchered every tune he attempted. I began helping with the salvage work itself, my strength useful for hauling heavy debris, my sharp eyesight useful for spotting valuable components among the wreckage we scavenged. He, In turn, learned pieces of my culture that I had thought would die with me. I taught him 3 words of the old flight song my mother used to sing, watching him mangle the pronunciation completely every single time, and finding myself smiling despite the ache that memory still carried. I told him more stories about Ashvane, about the canyon winds and the nesting grounds, and the particular color the sky turned during the long summer months. Each time I told these stories, they felt a little less like grief, and a little more like something worth preserving, worth remembering, worth sharing, rather than mourning alone. The final confrontation came nearly a year after Elias first pulled my dying ship into his cargo bay. The Scarn Collective, tired of chasing a target that kept slipping through increasingly clever evasive maneuvers, sent a larger force this time, 3 armed vessels intercepting us in open space, with no station rules to hide behind, no crowd of witnesses to shame them into retreat. There was nowhere left to run. Elias's hauler was fast for a salvage ship, but it was no match for 3 armed pursuers in open space. I watched the tactical display with a familiar, sickening dread, as the Scarn ships closed the distance, weapons systems powering up, their intent unmistakable. "Elias," I said, my voice tight. "You should let me go, right now, before this gets any worse." "Not happening," he said, hands steady on the controls despite the obvious danger closing in around us. "They will destroy your ship. They will kill you. For what? For a dragon woman with nothing left to offer you?" Elias glanced at me then, and something in his expression made me stop talking entirely. "You're not nothing," he said firmly. "You never were, and I'm not running from this fight just because it's hard." What happened next surprised even me. Elias, rather than continuing to flee, turned the hauler directly toward the largest of the 3 Scarn vessels, opening a communication channel and broadcasting on every frequency he could access, loud enough that nearby traffic control stations and independent freighters would pick up the signal. "This is Elias Marlowe, registered independent trader," he announced, voice carrying clearly across the open channel. "I am currently being pursued by 3 vessels identifying as Scarn Collective Enforcement, attempting an unlawful seizure in open space against a sentient being under my protection. I am requesting immediate assistance from any nearby vessel or station authority." The response was almost immediate. Halveth Station, still within communication range, along with 2 independent freighter captains who had grown tired of Scarn overreach in the region, responded to the distress call, their combined presence enough to make the Scarn enforcers reconsider their approach. Faced with witnesses, potential intervention, and the diplomatic mess that would follow an open confrontation, the Scarn vessels ultimately withdrew once more, though this time with far less confidence than before. It was not a permanent solution, I knew that. The Scarn Collective was patient, and their hatred for my kind ran deep enough that they would likely try again eventually. But it was proof of something important, something I had nearly forgotten during the long months of running and hiding and grieving. I was not alone anymore. That night, after the danger had passed, and the adrenaline had finally faded, I found Elias sitting quietly in the cargo hold, staring out through the small viewport at the stars beyond. "You keep risking everything for me," I said, settling down beside him. "I still do not fully understand why." He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "You asked me that before. My answer hasn't changed. I don't believe in letting people get erased just because someone more powerful decided they don't matter. I lost my home," I said softly. "My family, my entire species nearly. I do not know how to build something new from that kind of loss." Elias turned to look at me then, his expression gentle in a way that caught me off guard every time I saw it. "You don't have to build it alone," he said. "That's the whole point." We sat together in silence after that, watching the stars drift past the viewport, and for the first time since the destruction of Ashvane, I did not feel the familiar crushing weight of grief pressing down on my chest. I felt something else instead, something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. A few weeks later, our travels brought us near the edge of what used to be the Syndral Belt, close enough that the star charts still marked the region where my homeworld once existed. I had avoided this part of space for the entire year since the attack, unable to face the emptiness where Ashvane used to be. This time, Elias did not suggest avoiding it. Instead, He guided the hauler on a slow, deliberate pass through the region, giving me the choice of whether to look or look away. I looked. The devastation was still visible even after all this time, the scarred remains of what used to be a living, breathing world, now nothing more than drifting debris and poisoned atmosphere. My heart ached at the sight, the grief as sharp and immediate as it had been on the very first day. Elias reached over without a word and placed his hand over mine, small and warm against my scales, steady in a way that grounded me against the tide of memory threatening to pull me under. "You're home now," he said quietly. I turned to look at him, confused by the words at first. "This is not my home. This is nothing but ash and memory." "I don't mean the planet," he said. "I mean here, with me. Wherever this ship goes, that's home now, if you want it to be." I looked at him for a long moment, this small, stubborn human, who had pulled me from the wreckage of my old life without hesitation, who had stood against armed enforcers on my behalf, who had learned my grief by heart simply because he decided I was worth the effort of remembering. I thought about everything I had lost. The mineral cliffs at sunset, my mother's voice carrying across the nesting grounds, my sister's laughter echoing through the canyon winds, an entire world, gone in the space of a single afternoon, along with almost everyone who had ever known me. And then I thought about everything I had found instead. A rusted salvage ship that smelled like engine grease and old coffee. 3 mangled words of an ancient flight song, sung slightly off-key by someone who cared enough to try. A stubborn, steady presence beside me, who refused to let me disappear the way everything else had. Home was not a place after all, I realized. It never truly had been, not even on Ashvane. Home was the people who chose to stay, who refused to let you carry your grief alone, who looked at everything you had lost and decided you were still worth protecting anyway. Home, I repeated softly, testing the word against everything I had believed about it before. Elias smiled, small and genuine, his hand still resting over mine. "Home," he agreed. Outside the viewport, the ruins of Ashvane continued to drift silently through the darkness of space, a permanent reminder of everything that had been taken from me. But beside me, in the cramped, familiar cargo hold of a battered salvage ship, something new had already begun to grow in its place. I had lost everything once, but sitting there, beside a human who refused to let me disappear, I understood for the first time that losing everything did not have to mean losing everything forever. Sometimes, if you were lucky enough, if you found the right person, willing to stand beside you when the universe tried to erase you completely, you could build something new from the wreckage. Something worth calling home.